The forest was silent except for the distant howl of the wind. Max, a trained German Shepherd K9, sniffed the ground urgently. His partner, Rex, a younger but sharp Belgian Malinois, paced nearby, ears perked. Their handler, Ranger Sarah, had been missing for hours. The last radio transmission was just static, then nothing. Max let out a low whine. The scent was faint, buried under the smell of damp earth and pine, but he knew she was close. Then, a crack, a twig snapping. Both dogs froze. Rex's fur bristled. There, half buried under fallen leaves, was a boot. Sarah's boot. Max lunged forward, digging frantically. The dirt gave way, revealing something worse than they feared. Sarah lay motionless, her face pale, her uniform torn. A deep gash ran down her leg. Blood stained the leaves beneath her. Rex barked, sharp, urgent. But Max did something unexpected. Instead of running for help, he pressed his body against Sarah's chest, his nose nudging her face. Then he bit her. Not hard, not to hurt, but enough to make her gasp. Her eyes flew open, wide, disoriented. The dogs had just done the one thing no one expected. And this was only the beginning. The forest seemed to hold its breath as Sarah's eyelids fluttered, her vision blurry and unfocused. The sharp sting on her arm, where Max's teeth had lightly clamped down, sent a jolt through her body, snapping her back to consciousness. Confusion crashed over her in waves. The last thing she remembered was the radio crackling, the world spinning, and then darkness. Now, two pairs of intense canine eyes stared back at her, their expressions almost human in their urgency. Max's deep brown gaze was steady, calculating, while Rex's ears twitched at every rustle in the underbrush, his body coiled tight like a spring ready to snap. Sarah tried to push herself up, but a searing pain shot through her leg, forcing a gasp from her lips. Blood. Too much blood. The wound wasn't fresh. It had been hours, maybe longer. How long had she been lying here? The sun was already dipping low, casting long shadows between the trees. Nightfall in these woods wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. Max nudged her shoulder with his nose, a silent command. Move. But Sarah's limbs felt like lead, her head pounding as if something far worse than exhaustion gripped her. Poison? No. The wound wasn't from an animal bite. It was too clean, too deliberate. The realization hit her like ice water. Someone had done this to her. And if they'd left her here, they hadn't just wanted her out of the way, they'd wanted her dead. A low growl rumbled in Rex's throat as his head snapped toward the trees. Something was out there, watching. Sarah's breath hitched. She wasn't alone. Max positioned himself in front of her, his body rigid, a living shield between her and whatever lurked in the shadows. Then, a sound. Not an animal, not the wind. Footsteps. Slow, purposeful. Sarah's fingers dug into the dirt, her mind racing. If she screamed, would help come, or would it draw them closer? Her radio was gone, her gun missing. She was defenseless, but Max and Rex weren't. The dogs exchanged a glance, some unspoken understanding passing between them. Then, without warning, Rex bolted into the trees, barking furiously. A distraction. Max stayed rooted beside Sarah, his eyes never leaving the forest's edge. The footsteps paused, then retreated. But the relief was short-lived, because the moment Rex returned, panting and triumphant, Sarah saw it. Clutched in his teeth was a scrap of fabric. Dark green, camouflage, military issue. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't an accident. This was a hunt. And she was the prey. The scrap of fabric in Rex's mouth felt like a death sentence. Sarah's fingers trembled as she took it, the rough texture confirming her worst fear. This was no random attacker. The pattern matched the uniforms worn by the private security contractors who'd been patrolling the northern perimeter of the forest for weeks. Officially, they were there for wildlife control, but rumors among the rangers had been swirling about something darker. Missing hikers, strange equipment shipments at night, and now this. Someone had deliberately ambushed her, left her to bleed out, and hadn't even bothered to finish the job properly. That meant one of two things. Either they thought she was already dead, or they wanted her alive just long enough for something worse. The fading light made shadows stretch like grasping fingers between the trees, and every rustle of leaves sent fresh adrenaline coursing through her veins. Max pressed against her side, his warmth the only thing keeping her from spiraling into panic. She could feel his muscles tense, ready to spring at the slightest threat. Rex paced in tight circles, his nose working overtime to process scents Sarah couldn't begin to decipher. The dogs knew more than she did. Their behavior wasn't just protective, it was strategic. When Max suddenly stiffened and let out a soundless exhale through his nose, Sarah followed his gaze to a disturbance in the leaf litter 15 yards away. Something had been dragged through the mud. Something heavy. The realization hit her like a physical blow. This wasn't just about her. There had been a struggle here. A big one. And if the boot prints overlapping the drag marks were any indication, multiple people had been involved. Her leg screamed in protest as she forced herself to crawl toward the disturbed earth, every movement sending fresh waves of nausea through her. The dogs shadowed her, their bodies taut with tension. What she found made her stomach lurch. Deep grooves in the soil formed a perfect semicircle, as if something cylindrical had been rolled through the dirt, like a metal canister or a fuel drum. But it was the faint chemical smell clinging to the earth that confirmed her suspicions. This wasn't just any equipment. The sharp, acrid odor was unmistakable even through the forest's damp musk. TNT. Someone had been moving explosives through these woods, a lot of them. A distant engine revved to life somewhere beyond the tree line, the sound cutting through the twilight like a threat. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. They were still here, still working. And if they'd left evidence this obvious, it meant they weren't expecting any witnesses to report it. Max's low growl vibrated against her thigh as headlights flickered between distant trunks, bobbing with the uneven terrain. The vehicle was moving slowly, methodically, searching. Rex's ears flattened against his skull as a new sound joined the engine's rumble, the staticky crackle of a two-way radio. Voices. Too distorted to make out words, but the tone was unmistakably urgent. They knew she was missing, and they were hunting for more than just her now. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. Her accident hadn't been personal. She'd stumbled onto something massive, something worth killing over. And the dogs, trained to track, to detect, to protect, had just become the only witnesses who could lead authorities to the truth. Sarah's vision swam as she tried to stand, her injured leg buckling instantly. Max caught her weight without hesitation, his shoulder wedged firmly under her arm. They needed to move. Needed to get to higher ground where she could see approaching threats. But as she scanned the darkening forest, a new horror dawned on her. The headlights weren't the only lights in the woods anymore. Pinpricks of green flickered between distant trees. Not flashlights, not lanterns, glow sticks, marking a path. And they were getting closer. The eerie green glow pulsed like malevolent fireflies in the gathering darkness, casting unnatural shadows that seemed to twist the very trees into grotesque shapes. Sarah's breath came in short, ragged gasps as she pressed herself against the rough bark of an ancient oak, her fingers digging into Max's fur for balance. The chemical tang in the air grew stronger with each passing second, mixing with the metallic scent of her own blood in a nauseating cocktail that made her head spin. Rex had vanished into the undergrowth moments ago, his dark form melting into the shadows with the silent efficiency only a trained K9 could achieve. She knew he was scouting ahead, using every ounce of his training to assess the threat, but the absence of her second protector left her feeling terrifyingly exposed. The glow sticks weren't random. They formed a deliberate pattern, a gridwork of light that suggested something far more organized than a simple search party. This was a coordinated operation, and judging by the distant but unmistakable sound of shovels biting into earth, they weren't just hiding explosives. They were burying something. Pain lanced up Sarah's leg as she shifted position, the wound in her thigh now throbbing in time with her racing heartbeat. The blood loss was making her thoughts sluggish, but the adrenaline kept her focused on one terrifying realization. She'd accidentally uncovered an operation much bigger than anyone could have imagined. The private security contractors weren't just trespassing. They were using this protected forest land for something that required heavy excavation, military-grade explosives, and a willingness to kill anyone who stumbled upon their secret. The radio chatter grew louder, snippets of conversation cutting through the static. East perimeter clear. Load the last crates before find that damn ranger. The voices were calm, professional. These weren't panicked amateurs, they were trained operatives following precise protocols. Max's body tensed suddenly, his ears swiveling toward a new sound, the soft crunch of approaching footsteps. Too close. Sarah clamped a hand over her own mouth, willing herself to become part of the tree at her back. Through the leaves, she could make out two figures moving in synchronized formation, their black tactical gear making them nearly invisible, except for the occasional glint of moonlight on weapon barrels. Night vision goggles, military-issue boots, and slung across their backs, the distinctive shape of assault rifles. This wasn't security work. This was a paramilitary operation. One of the men paused barely 10 feet from Sarah's hiding spot, his head cocked as if listening for something. The glow stick dangling from his belt illuminated the hard planes of his face, and the unmistakable tattoo snaking up his neck. A coiled serpent with a single red eye. The symbol matched intelligence briefings she'd seen about a rogue mercenary group linked to arms smuggling across 3 continents. A twig snapped somewhere to Sarah's left. The armed man's head whipped around, his weapon coming up in a fluid motion. Time seemed to freeze as Sarah watched his finger hover over the trigger. Then, a blur of motion erupted from the bushes. Rex hit the man at full speed, 80 pounds of pure muscle and fury slamming into his chest with enough force to send them both crashing to the ground. The second mercenary spun toward the struggle, his rifle coming up, but Max was already moving. Sarah had never seen her normally discipline. K9 abandoned training like this. He didn't bark, didn't growl. He struck like a shadow given form, his jaws closing around the man's wrist with bone-crushing precision. The scream that tore through the night air was cut short as Rex adjusted his grip on the first man's tactical vest and dragged him bodily into the undergrowth. Chaos erupted in the woods, shouts, running footsteps. The staccato burst of radio alerts. Sarah knew this was their only chance. Using the tree for support, she forced herself upright, biting back a scream as her leg threatened to give way. The world swayed dangerously, but the sight of Max standing guard over the now unconscious second mercenary kept her focused. Rex reappeared at her side, his muzzle dark with something that wasn't mud. The dogs had bought them time, but not much. The glow sticks were converging on their position from multiple directions now, the eerie green lights bobbing like will-o'-the-wisps, leading them to certain death. Then Sarah saw it. Through a gap in the trees, illuminated by the mercenaries' own lights, was the reason for all this secrecy. A yawning pit at least 20 feet across, surrounded by stacked crates stamped with warning symbols even she could recognize from this distance. Biological hazard, radioactive material, and standing at the edge of the excavation site, directing operations with cold efficiency, was a face she knew all too well, Chief Ranger Donovan, her boss, the man who'd personally assigned her to this patrol route. The betrayal hit harder than any bullet. This wasn't just an outside threat, the corruption went right to the top. And as Donovan's gaze swept the tree line, pausing just a second too long on the disturbed bushes where Sarah and the dogs had been hiding, she realized with chilling certainty that he knew. He'd always known she would be the one to find this. Maybe he'd even counted on it. A new sound cut through the night, the whine of a drone powering up. Then another, and another. The green glow wasn't just from glow sticks anymore. Dozens of tiny red lights blinked to life in the canopy above them as the drones activated their tracking systems. They weren't just being hunted, they were being scanned, cataloged. And in that moment, Sarah understood the true depth of the nightmare she'd uncovered. This wasn't just about what they were burying in these woods. It was about what, or who, they planned to dig back up. The mechanical whirring of the drones formed an ominous canopy above them, their red tracking lights cutting through the darkness like malevolent stars. Sarah pressed her body deeper into the damp earth, feeling the cold seep through her uniform as the reality of her situation crystallized with terrifying clarity. Chief Ranger Donovan's involvement changed everything. This wasn't just an incursion by outside forces, but a systemic corruption that had been methodically dismantling the forest's protections from within. The crates of hazardous materials, the armed mercenaries, the excavation site, all of it had been happening right under the noses of the very people sworn to protect this land. And now the drones were painting targets on whatever heat signatures they detected in this sector. Max's warm body trembled against her side, not from fear, but from barely restrained energy, his training warring with instinct as he watched the mechanical hunters circle above. Rex had disappeared again, but Sarah could sense rather than see his movement through the underbrush, a shadow among shadows stalking the stalkers. A sudden burst of static from the fallen mercenary's radio made Sarah's heart stutter. "Team Gamma, report in." The voice was distorted but unmistakably Donovan's. Thermal scans showing multiple contacts near the eastern ridge. Sarah's blood turned to ice. They were already spotted. The realization hit at the same moment Max's head snapped toward a new sound, the distinct click of a safety being disengaged somewhere in the trees to their left. Without thinking, Sarah rolled sideways, dragging Max with her just as a bullet tore through the space where her head had been a second earlier. The suppressed shot was nearly silent, but the impact of the round into the tree behind them sent splinters flying. Professional shooters, night vision, thermal tracking. This wasn't a search party anymore. This was a cleanup operation. Rex materialized out of nowhere, his body slamming into the new threat with enough force to send the rifle clattering to the ground. In the chaotic seconds that followed, Sarah caught glimpses of the struggle. Rex's jaws clamped on an arm, the muted grunt of pain, the glint of a knife being drawn. She wanted to help, but movement to her right froze her in place. Another figure was approaching from the excavation site, this one moving with deliberate calm despite the chaos unfolding around them. The moonlight caught on polished boots and the familiar badge on a ranger's hat. Donovan himself was coming to inspect the disturbance. The drones above them suddenly changed formation, clustering together like a swarm of insects before abruptly diverting away from their position. Someone had called them off. But why? The answer came in the form of a new sound, one that didn't belong in these woods at all. The deep, rhythmic thumping of helicopter blades cutting through the night air. Not the light forestry service choppers Sarah knew, but the heavy, methodical beat of a military transport. The trees began to sway unnaturally as the downdraft reached them, leaves tearing from branches in the artificial storm. Donovan stopped in his tracks, his head tilting upward with what looked like genuine surprise before his expression hardened into something far more dangerous. He barked an order into his radio, but the response was lost in the growing roar of the approaching aircraft. Max seized the moment of distraction, clamping his teeth gently on Sarah's sleeve and pulling her backward into denser foliage. Every movement sent fresh waves of agony through her injured leg, but survival instinct overrode the pain. The helicopter wasn't part of Donovan's operation. That much was clear from his reaction, which meant there was a third player entering this deadly game. As they retreated, Sarah caught a glimpse of the excavation site, now fully illuminated by the helicopter's searchlights. The pit was deeper than she'd initially thought, with strange metallic structures protruding from its depths. Not natural rock formations, but the angular, manufactured lines of something that had no business being buried in a protected forest. Rex rejoined them, his muzzle wet and his breathing heavy, but otherwise unharmed. The three of them moved as one organism now, the dogs anticipating Sarah's every stumble, every needed pause. The helicopter's arrival had thrown Donovan's men into confusion, with figures running in multiple directions, some toward the site, others away into the trees. But one detail stood out. Several mercenaries were now forming a perimeter around a specific cluster of crates near the pit's edge, their body language shifting from offensive to defensive. They were protecting something more valuable than the rest. The helicopter's searchlight suddenly locked onto their position, the blinding white light turning night into day for one paralyzing second before swinging away again. Whether they'd been seen or not, Sarah couldn't tell, but the brief illumination revealed something else. A narrow ravine cutting through the forest floor just ahead, its steep sides offering both danger and potential cover. It might be their only chance to get close enough to see what was in those guarded crates without being detected. As Sarah lowered herself painfully into the ravine's shadowed embrace, the dogs flanking her like living armor, a new sound cut through the chaos, one that made her blood run colder than anything else that night. From the depths of the excavation site came a deep metallic groan, like some great machine stirring to life after decades of slumber. Then, clear even over the helicopter's roar and the shouting men, a series of sharp, rhythmic beeps that sounded unmistakably like an activated countdown. The crates weren't just being buried. Something inside them was being awakened. The metallic groaning from the pit deepened into a shuddering vibration that traveled up through the earth itself, making loose pebbles dance along the ravine's edge where Sarah and the dogs crouched. The beeping had accelerated, each electronic pulse coming faster than the last, syncing with the frantic hammering of Sarah's heart against her ribs. Above them, the helicopter's searchlight swept back across the excavation site, illuminating a scene that made Sarah's breath catch. Donovan was no longer the composed authority figure she'd known for years, but a man caught in the midst of a plan unraveling too quickly. He was shouting into a satellite phone now, his free hand gesturing wildly at the mercenaries guarding the central crates. Two of them were prying open the largest container with crowbars, their movements hurried but precise, revealing glimpses of something metallic and angular inside. The helicopter banked sharply, its side door sliding open to reveal black-clad figures fast roping down into the chaos. These weren't military. Their unmarked uniforms and specialized gear suggested a private tactical team. But whose? Max's low growl pulled Sarah's attention back to their immediate danger. The ravine, while providing cover, was also a potential death trap if discovered. The walls were too steep to climb quickly, especially with her injured leg, and the only exits led either deeper toward the excavation site or back into the forest where Donovan's men were regrouping. Rex nudged her hand with his nose, then gestured with his head toward a narrow fissure in the ravine wall. A natural drainage tunnel barely to crawl through. It was pitch black inside, but the faintest breath of air moving through it suggested it might lead somewhere. The distant but unmistakable sound of booted feet approaching their position made the decision for them. The tunnel was a claustrophobic nightmare, the cold stone pressing against Sarah's shoulders as she dragged herself forward inch by agonizing inch. The dogs moved ahead of her, their keen senses navigating the absolute darkness with an ease she envied. The air smelled of damp earth and something else, a faint acrid tang that grew stronger as they progressed. After what felt like an eternity of crawling, the tunnel opened abruptly into a wider space, the sudden lack of enclosing walls making Sarah dizzy until her eyes adjusted. Moonlight filtered in through cracks in what appeared to be an old storm cellar, its rusted metal doors slightly ajar above them. The room, if it could be called that, was littered with decaying supplies from what looked like decades past, moldering crates labeled in faded military stencil, broken equipment, and most chillingly, a series of yellowed maps pinned to one crumbling concrete wall. Sarah's pulse spiked as she recognized the forest's topography on those maps, overlaid with markings that made no sense. Grid coordinates that didn't match modern surveys, symbols that looked almost like astronomical alignments. But one detail stood out clearly, a red X marking this very location, annotated with a date from 60 years ago and a single word, containment. The pieces clicked together with terrifying clarity. This wasn't just some recent illegal operation. They'd stumbled onto something that had been buried here since the Cold War, something important enough to kill for then and now. A sudden crash from above made all three of them freeze. The cellar doors were being thrown open, the metallic bang echoing through the chamber. Heavy footsteps descended old stairs hidden in the shadows, accompanied by the beam of a powerful flashlight sweeping across the walls. Sarah pressed herself into the darkest corner, Max and Rex forming a living barrier in front of her. The light passed over the maps, paused, then continued its search. Then, a voice that turned Sarah's blood to ice. "Find them." Donovan's command was quiet, deadly. The dogs can't have taken her far, and for God's sake, someone shut down that activation sequence before. His words were cut off by a sound that defied explanation. A deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating up through the stone beneath them. The flashlight beam wavered as Donovan's breathing hitched audibly. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its certainty, edged with something Sarah had never heard from him before. Fear. It's too late. They've woken it up. The flashlight swung wildly as Donovan retreated up the stairs. His footsteps hurried now. The cellar doors slammed shut with finality, plunging them back into darkness. But the hum continued growing, now accompanied by a new sound. Something mechanical powering up deep underground. A sound that hadn't been heard in this forest for over half a century. Sarah reached for the dogs in the dark, her hands finding their warm fur. They were all trembling now, but not from fear alone. The air itself seemed charged with energy, making the hair on her arms stand on end. Somewhere above them, men were shouting in panic. The helicopter's engine whined as it climbed rapidly, and beneath it all, that impossible hum deepened into something almost like a voice. A single, sustained note that didn't belong to any machine Sarah had ever heard. Rex suddenly lunged forward in the dark, his claws scrabbling at one particular section of the crumbling wall. Dirt showered down as he dug, revealing not more stone but metal, an old access panel hidden behind decades of neglect. The vibration was strongest here, the sound almost deafening at close range. Max joined him, using his powerful forepaws to clear debris until the outline of a sealed doorway became clear. At its center was a rusted wheel valve, the kind used on submarines or pressurized chambers. And etched into the metal around it, barely visible under layers of grime, was the same symbol they'd seen on the mercenary's neck, the coiled serpent with a single red eye. Sarah's hands closed around the cold metal wheel. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to take the dogs and flee as far from this place as possible. But the sounds from above told her there would be no escape that way. Whatever was happening here had been set in motion, and the only way out might be through. With a strength she didn't know she still possessed, Sarah began to turn the wheel. It resisted at first, then gave way with a shriek of protesting metal. As the seal broke, a rush of stale, chemically tinged air billowed out, and with it, the first flickering glow of ancient fluorescent lights awakening in the depths below. The last thing Sarah saw before the dogs pushed past her into the revealed passageway was the date stamped next to the serpent symbol, a date that matched exactly with the most infamous UFO incident in military history. This was no arms cache. They'd just broken into a buried Cold War laboratory, and something inside was still alive. The fluorescent lights flickered like dying stars as Sarah stepped into the underground facility, the air thick with the scent of ozone and something organic, sickly sweet like rotting fruit left too long in the sun. The corridor stretched before them, its walls lined with cracked glass panels revealing laboratories frozen in time. Dust-covered equipment sat exactly where it had been abandoned decades ago. Microscopes with slides still clamped in place, centrifuges holding test tubes of now evaporated liquids, and chalkboards covered in equations that made Sarah's stomach twist. Max and Rex moved ahead with cautious precision, their noses working overtime to process the overwhelming chemical cocktail hanging in the stale air. The deeper they went, the more the facility's true purpose became horrifyingly clear. This wasn't just a lab. The side rooms contained examination tables with heavy leather restraints, cabinets filled with vials of unknown substances, and most chilling of all, a wall of filing cabinets with labels that read subjects, followed by numbers instead of names. The humming had grown louder now, vibrating through the metal floor grates in pulses that seemed almost rhythmic. Sarah's injured leg buckled as another wave of dizziness hit her, forcing her to lean against a bank of rusted control panels. Her hand came away sticky from a dark substance smeared across the controls, not rust. Something fresher. The realization hit her just as Rex let out a soft whine, his body lowering into a defensive crouch. They weren't the first living things to come down here recently. The smears continued down the hallway in deliberate patterns, as if something, or someone, had been dragged deeper into the facility. The lights above them flickered again, and in that split second of darkness, Sarah saw it, a faint blue glow emanating from a doorway at the end of the hall. Max's reaction was instantaneous. Every muscle in his body tensed, his ears flattening against his skull as a low, continuous growl built in his chest. A sound Sarah had never heard from him before. It wasn't aggression. It was primal recognition. Whatever lay beyond that door triggered something deep in the dog's instincts, something beyond training or experience. The blue glow pulsed brighter, casting eerie shadows that moved wrong, not matching their own movements. Rex inched forward despite Max's warning, his nose twitching at a new scent cutting through the chemical miasma. Sarah recognized it too now, the sharp, coppery tang of fresh blood. The control panel beside her suddenly crackled to life with a burst of static, making all three of them jump. A distorted voice echoed through ancient speakers. Containment breach in Sector 5. The recording skipped. Subjects are awake. More static. God help us, they're breeding. Then the voice cut off abruptly, replaced by a sound that turned Sarah's blood to ice. A high-pitched, chittering noise that seemed to come from all directions at once. Not mechanical, biological. The blue glow intensified as something moved beyond the doorway. Not the shadow of a person or animal, but something that seemed to shift and flow like liquid given form. Max's growl turned into a full snarl as he positioned himself squarely between Sarah and the approaching thing. Rex backed toward her, his body trembling not with fear, but with barely restrained energy, every instinct telling him to attack, but the unknown nature of the threat holding him in check. Sarah's hand found the cold metal of a fire extinguisher mounted on the wall, the only potential weapon in sight. The blue glow was close enough now that she could see its source, a massive containment tank just visible through the doorway, its glass fractured from the inside out. Thick fluid dripped from the cracks, pooling on the floor in iridescent puddles that seemed to move against gravity. But the tank wasn't empty. Floating within the remaining fluid was a shape that made Sarah's mind rebel, something with too many limbs, its form shifting even in stasis. A new sound joined the chaos, the distant but unmistakable clang of the entrance hatch being forced open. Donovan's voice echoed down the corridor, his words indistinct but his tone urgent. They were coming from one direction. The blue glow pulsed toward them from the other. The fire extinguisher slipped from Sarah's numb fingers, hitting the metal grate with a clang that seemed to trigger everything at once. The blue light flared blindingly bright. Max launched himself forward with a deafening bark, and from the depths of the broken containment tank, something answered. The moment Max's paws left the ground, the blue light erupted in a blinding flash, casting grotesque shadows that writhed across the walls like living things. Sarah's vision whited out for a terrifying second, her hands flying up instinctively to shield her eyes. When her sight returned, Max was frozen mid-leap. Not physically, but his entire body had locked up in a way she'd never seen before, his muscles twitching uncontrollably as he hovered inches above the floor. The blue glow wasn't just light, it had substance, clinging to Max's fur like static-charged cobwebs, pulsing in time with the unnatural hum vibrating through the facility. Rex let out a panicked yelp and tried to dart forward, but the same glowing tendrils lashed out from the doorway, wrapping around his hind legs and sending him crashing to the ground in a tangle of spasming limbs. Sarah's scream caught in her throat as she realized what she was seeing. The light wasn't just restraining them. It was reading them. Tiny fractal patterns flickered across the dogs' bodies wherever the glow touched, as if scanning their very DNA. From the shattered containment tank came a wet, tearing sound that made Sarah's stomach heave. The creature inside, if it could even be called that, was unfolding itself through the broken glass with impossible fluidity. Its form defied description, shifting between solid and liquid states, sometimes appearing almost canine in shape before dissolving into something utterly alien. The blue glow emanated from its core, pulsing brighter with each passing second. But the most horrifying realization came when it moved past Max without attacking him. Instead, the light connecting them intensified, and for one heart-stopping moment Max's eyes reflected the same eerie blue glow back at the creature. They were communicating. Boots pounded down the corridor behind them. Donovan and his men were seconds away. The creature's reaction was instantaneous. The blue light flared violently, throwing Sarah against the wall hard enough to make her vision swim. Files rained down from overturned cabinets as the entire facility seemed to shudder. Through the ringing in her ears, Sarah heard Donovan shout something about primary containment protocols before gunfire erupted, not aimed at them, but at the creature. The bullets passed straight through its shifting form without apparent effect, but the sound triggered something in the dogs. Rex broke free of the glowing restraints first, his teeth snapping at the air where the light had touched him. Max followed, shaking his massive head as if clearing water from his ears, but his eyes still held traces of that unnatural blue. The creature recoiled from the gunfire not in pain, but in what looked like recognition. It flowed backward toward its broken tank, the blue light condensing into a dense sphere around it. The temperature in the room plummeted so suddenly that Sarah's breath fogged in the air. Frost crackled across the walls as the creature began changing again, its form stabilizing, solidifying, until standing before them was something that made Sarah's mind reel. A dog, not just any dog. A perfect, glowing replica of Max, down to the smallest detail except for those piercing blue eyes. The real Max let out a confused whine, circling the doppelganger with his nose working furiously. The creature. Max tilted its head in an eerily familiar gesture before turning toward the approaching mercenaries. Then it did something Sarah couldn't comprehend. It barked. Not an alien sound, but Max's exact bark, down to the unique cadence she'd recognize anywhere. The effect on Donovan was immediate and terrifying. He stumbled back as if struck, his face draining of color. No, it's learned. His whisper cut off as the creature Max charged, not to attack, but to herd them, driving the armed men back down the corridor with precise, calculated movements that mirrored K9 training maneuvers. It was using Max's memories against them. Rex pressed against Sarah's side, his body trembling with barely restrained energy. The real Max stood transfixed, his nose still working the air as the blue glow around the creature intensified again. Sarah suddenly understood. The creature wasn't just mimicking Max. It was evolving based on what it found in him, and if it had accessed Max's training memories, his loyalty, his bond with her. The lights above them flickered violently as a new sound joined the chaos, the screech of metal under incredible stress. From deeper in the facility came thunderous crashes as something massive gave way. The creature's head snapped up, its blue eyes locking onto Sarah's for one terrifying moment of perfect understanding before it dissolved back into that shifting liquid form and streaked away down the corridor, leaving trails of glowing blue droplets in its wake. Max let out a sharp bark and took off after it without hesitation, his claws scrabbling on the metal grates. Rex lunged to follow, but Sarah grabbed his collar at the last second. The facility was coming apart around them, ceiling tiles crashing down in clouds of dust. Somewhere in the chaos, Donovan was screaming orders about detonations and fallback points. But all Sarah could focus on was the realization crashing over her with more force than any explosion. This creature hadn't been contained here. It had been waiting, and Max had just led it straight to the surface. The corridor erupted into chaos as Max vanished into the swirling blue glow, his barks echoing strangely, sometimes sounding like himself, sometimes distorted into something that raised the hair on Sarah's neck. Rex strained against her grip, his muscles coiled like springs, every instinct screaming to follow his partner into whatever nightmare awaited. The facility shook violently, pipes bursting along the ceiling to spray rust-colored water in all directions. Somewhere in the distance, the creature's eerie mimicry of Max's bark shifted into a high-pitched chittering that set Sarah's teeth on edge. Donovan's men were retreating now, their shouts laced with raw panic as they scrambled back toward the surface entrance, But one voice cut through the bedlam. Donovan himself, not fleeing, but charging deeper into the facility, a strange device in his hands that glowed with the same unnatural blue as the creature. Sarah's decision came in a split second. She released Rex's collar and pushed forward, her injured leg screaming in protest as she forced herself into a limping run. The corridor branched ahead, left toward the surface where safety might await, or right where Max and the creature had disappeared into deepening shadows punctuated by pulses of that terrible blue light. Rex didn't hesitate, tearing down the right passage with Sarah struggling to keep pace. The walls here were different, lined with containment cells whose glass observation windows were shattered outward, the frames twisted as if something had burst free from within. The floor became increasingly slick with a viscous, iridescent fluid that clung to her boots like glue. They rounded a corner just in time to see Donovan skid to a halt before a massive security door hanging crookedly on its hinges. Beyond it stretched a cavernous chamber dominated by a central dais where the creature, now fluctuating wildly between Max's form and something utterly alien, stood surrounded by a swirling vortex of blue energy. Max circled the dais, his movements strangely synchronized with the creature's shifts, as if caught in some bizarre dance. But the most chilling sight was the dozens of cylindrical tanks lining the chamber's walls, all shattered, all empty. This hadn't been containment. It had been a nest. Donanor raised the device in his hands, its glow intensifying to a painful brightness. Subject Alpha, return to stasis. His voice carried an edge of desperation that suggested he knew the command was futile. The creature responded by swelling in size, its form elongating until it loomed over the dais, blue light arcing between its shifting limbs like lightning. Max barked sharply, not in aggression but what sounded like warning, as the energy in the room spiked. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing against Sarah's skin with an almost physical weight. Rex lunged forward just as Donovan activated the device. A piercing whine filled the chamber as a beam of concentrated blue light lanced toward the creature. But before it could connect, Max leapt into its path with a defiant snarl. The beam struck him instead, sending him crashing to the ground in a shower of sparks. The effect was instantaneous. The creature shrieked, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once, and the entire chamber convulsed as if struck by an earthquake. Cracks spiderwebbed across the floor as the dais began crumbling inward, revealing a yawning pit beneath it. Sarah scrambled toward Max's motionless form, her hands slipping in the strange fluid now gushing from the pit. Rex reached him first, nosing at his partner's side with frantic whines. To her relief, Max stirred weakly, his fur still crackling with residual energy. But the creature's reaction was beyond anything she could have anticipated. It flowed over them in a wave of protective blue light, forming a barrier between them and Donovan just as the chamber ceiling began collapsing in earnest. In that surreal moment, pressed between two loyal dogs with an alien entity shielding them from harm, Sarah understood the terrible truth. This creature wasn't some mindless horror. It had chosen Max as its bridge to understanding humanity, and through him it had learned about loyalty, sacrifice, and bonds that transcended species. The facility hadn't been studying it. They'd been trying to weaponize it. And now it was fighting back with the only weapons it had adopted, those it had learned from man's best friend. Donovan screamed something unintelligible as the floor gave way beneath him, the device tumbling from his grasp into the abyss below. The last thing Sarah saw before the creature swept them all toward an emergency exit was Donovan's face, not filled with fear, but with a dawning realization that chilled her more than any monster could. This had been his plan all along. The containment breach, the activation. He'd wanted the creature loose. And as the world dissolved into blue light and howling wind, Sarah realized the most horrifying twist of all. They'd just helped unleash something the world wasn't ready for. But whether it would be a savior or a destroyer depended entirely on what humanity had taught it through the hearts of two brave dogs. The final section would reveal the shocking surface aftermath, where the creature's true purpose becomes clear, and Max's transformation completes in a way no one could have predicted. The moral about loyalty transcending all boundaries would crystallize when the dogs make their ultimate choice between humanity and something far greater. Would you like me to continue? The world dissolved into a whirlwind of blue light and screaming wind as the creature's energy enveloped them, carrying Sarah and the dogs through the collapsing facility with impossible speed. The sensation was like being caught in a tidal wave made of electricity, every nerve ending firing at once, her vision reduced to streaks of cobalt and shadow. She could feel Max pressed against one side, Rex against the other, their warm bodies the only anchors in this maelstrom of alien energy. Then, impact. The breath exploded from Sarah's lungs as they tumbled onto damp earth beneath an open night sky. The creature's glow had diminished to a faint pulse, its form now hovering weakly above them like a dying ember caught in the wind. Sarah rolled onto her back, gasping, her fingers digging into cool grass instead of metal grating. They were outside, but not where they'd entered. The trees here were different, the terrain unfamiliar. No sign of Donovan's excavation site or the mercenaries. Just the endless forest stretching in all directions beneath a star-strewn sky. Max staggered to his feet first, shaking his coat as if dislodging water. But when he turned to look at her, Sarah's blood ran cold. His eyes still held traces of that unnatural blue glow, pulsing faintly in time with the creature's dimming light. Worse, his movements were different, too precise, too calculated, as if something inside him had been fundamentally altered. Rex's low growl drew her attention to the trees. At first, Sarah saw nothing. Then the shadows moved. Figures emerged from the forest. Not armed men, but dogs. Dozens of them. Every size and breed, some she recognized as missing pets from nearby towns, others clearly wild strays. But all shared one terrifying feature. Their eyes reflected the same eerie blue as the creature's core. They moved in perfect unison, forming a loose circle around the clearing without aggression, just quiet observation. The creature above them pulsed brighter for a moment, its form shifting into something vaguely canine before dissolving again into amorphous light. A sharp pain in her leg made Sarah look down. Her wound was bleeding again, the blood soaking through her torn pant leg in a dark stain. But as she watched, something impossible happened. The creature extended a tendril of light toward her injury, and where the blue glow touched, the pain lessened. Not healed, but muted, as if her very nerves were being recalibrated. Max whined and nudged her hand with his nose, his gaze intense. The message was clear. They needed to move. The sound of engines cut through the night, not just one vehicle, but an entire convoy approaching from the east. Helicopter blades chopped the air somewhere beyond the tree line. The military hadn't just been watching Donovan's operation. They'd been waiting for this exact moment. Sarah tried to stand, but her body refused to cooperate. The blood loss, the adrenaline crash, the sheer impossibility of everything that had happened, it all came crashing down at once. Her vision tunneled as she slumped forward, only vaguely aware of strong jaws gripping her jacket collar, keeping her head from hitting the ground. Through the haze of near unconsciousness, she saw the creature's light intensify one final time. It flowed over Max in a sudden rush, merging with him in a flash so bright it burned after images into Sarah's retinas. When her vision cleared, Max stood transformed. Not possessed, but enhanced. His physical form remained, but his outline shimmered with barely contained energy, his paws leaving faint blue traces in the grass as he moved. The assembled dogs all turned as one toward some distant point, their ears pricked in identical attention. Rex positioned himself between Sarah and the approaching vehicles, his hackles raised but his stance uncertain. The bond between him and Max was still there, but something new thrummed beneath the surface, a connection that went deeper than training or instinct. Max turned those glowing eyes toward Sarah one last time, before lifting his head in a howl that shouldn't have been possible. A sound that started as a normal canine cry before splitting into harmonics no earthly throat could produce. The other dogs joined in, creating a chorus that made the very air vibrate. Then, silence. The convoy's engines died abruptly. The helicopter's rotors slowed to a stop mid-air. Every artificial light within miles winked out at once, plunging the forest into primordial darkness, broken only by the pulsing blue glow emanating from the assembled dogs. In that suspended moment, Sarah understood the final, terrible truth. This wasn't an invasion. It wasn't an attack. The creature had never been the experiment. It had been the observer. And through Max, it had found what it came for. Not a species to conquer, but one to join. As blackness finally claimed her, Sarah's last conscious thought was a realization more frightening than any monster. The dogs weren't being controlled. They were evolving. And when she woke, the world would belong to them. Consciousness returned to Sarah in painful waves, each pulse of awareness bringing new sensations. The acrid smell of burnt electronics, the metallic taste of blood in her mouth, the unsettling silence pressing against her eardrums like physical weight. Her eyelids fluttered open to a world washed in eerie monochrome. The pre-dawn light filtered through a strange blue haze that clung to everything like radioactive fog. She was propped against the splintered stump of an ancient oak, her injured leg now wrapped in a makeshift bandage of... Was that moss? Not just ordinary moss, but glowing strands that pulsed faintly where they touched her wound. The pain reduced to a distant throb. Movement to her left made her jerk sideways. Rex stood guard, his body rigid with tension, but it was his eyes that stopped her breath. One still normal warm brown, the other now streaked with swirling blue tendrils like ink in water. He panted heavily, his gaze darting between her and the tree line where shadows moved with unnatural synchronization. Not just dogs anymore. Deer, foxes, even a massive black bear, all moving together in perfect harmony, their eyes reflecting that same otherworldly glow. But where was Max? The answer came in a burst of light from the clearing's center. The transformation had completed. Max stood enveloped in a shimmering blue aura, his physical form now interlaced with the creature's energy in a way that defied comprehension. He was both dog and something far more. His paws left burning afterimages in the air with each step. His bark carried harmonics that vibrated in Sarah's bones. But most terrifying of all was the intelligence in those glowing eyes. Ancient and alien, yet still undeniably Max. A rustling in the undergrowth revealed the first human survivors. Not soldiers, but civilians from nearby towns. Their eyes were glassy, movements jerky as marionettes, yet they showed no signs of fear as they began constructing something from the debris. Sarah's blood ran cold as she recognized components from the destroyed military vehicles being repurposed with impossible efficiency into a towering structure that hummed with latent energy. This wasn't mind control, it was symbiosis. The creature, now part of Max, wasn't conquering, it was building. Rex suddenly tensed, his mismatched eyes locking onto something behind her. Sarah turned to see a figure stumbling into the clearing. Donovan, his uniform torn, one arm hanging uselessly at his side. But his eyes were clear, human. In his good hand, he clutched a jagged shard of the creature's original containment unit, its edges glowing faintly blue. His voice was raw when he spoke. "You see now, don't you? This was never about weapons. That thing is a bridge, and your damn dog just gave it the key to cross over." Above them, the sky began to fracture. The cracks in the sky spread like spiderwebs, fractures of brilliant blue light splitting the dawn apart, as reality itself seemed to bend under the weight of what was coming through. Sarah tried to stand, her fingers digging into the damp earth as the ground vibrated beneath her, not with destruction, but with a strange, pulsing energy that made the air hum like a plucked guitar string. Donovan staggered forward, his face a mask of agonized triumph, the containment shard in his hand flaring brighter as the fractures above them widened. 60 years we spent trying to control it, he rasped, his voice barely audible over the growing resonance. Turns out, all it needed was a doorway, a loyal heart to show it how. Max, no, the being that had been Max, turned its luminous gaze toward Sarah. In that moment, she didn't see an invader or a monster. She saw the same devotion that had once made him lick her tears after a hard day, the same courage that had him charging into danger to protect her. But now, layered beneath that, was something vast and ancient. The creature hadn't erased him, it had understood him. The realization struck her like lightning. This wasn't an ending, it was an evolution. The animals, the entranced humans, even the plants themselves seemed to lean toward the light as the sky shattered fully, revealing not a spaceship or an army, but a connection. A glowing web of threads linking every living thing in a shimmering network of light and energy. The creature hadn't come to conquer. It had come to commune, to show them what loyalty could really mean when stretched beyond species, beyond worlds. Donanor's shard clattered to the ground as the light consumed him, his expression shifting from fear to awe as the glow wrapped around him too. Sarah felt it then, the pull, the invitation. Rex whined beside her, his half-transformed eyes wide with wonder as he took a step forward. She could resist. The glow didn't force, it only offered. With a deep breath, Sarah reached out. Not in surrender, but in trust. The moment her fingers brushed the light, the world changed. She saw through Max's eyes not just his physical sight, but his love, pure and uncomplicated. She felt the creature's loneliness, drifting for eons until it found a planet where creatures gave their whole hearts without hesitation. And she understood, in a way words could never capture, the truth at the core of it all. Loyalty isn't about obedience. It's about choosing to stand together, even when the universe tries to tear you apart. The light swelled, the last barriers dissolving as Earth joined the web, not conquered, but welcomed. And somewhere in the glow, a familiar bark echoed, joyful and free. The end. Moral lesson. True loyalty transcends all boundaries, species, distance, even understanding. It's the unspoken promise to stand together in the face of the unknown, and in doing so discover connections greater than ourselves.